All right. After much delay, we are finally live, everyone. Welcome back to Reasoned Answers. Of course, you're home for the
crackhead clown individuals.
Had quite an adventure getting started here today. My microphone was not working for unknown reasons. I messed with it for a while, and then I decided to reboot the computer. The computer took quite some time to shut down. I don't know if Windows was covertly installing an update or what, but took quite some time to shut down. Then when I got back, I apparently started up the streaming program before everything was loaded. So Stream Deck wasn't connected to the streaming program. So I had to restart that again after I figured that out. Quite an adventure. But we are live now, and I'm glad you are here. Have an interesting show for you today. I was doing some research inspired by unrelated things and accidentally came across a story from within the last couple weeks or so. So, you know, breaking news in a sense.
And you see breaking news. Yes? No? Okay.
About an Imam in the United Kingdom who was arrested, tried, and convicted and sentenced. The news article was actually on the sentencing. The conviction was earlier in the year. Sentenced to jail for abusing children. And I said, this is a good opportunity to kind of look into these statistics, see how common things are, because, we have perceptions and then there's reality. And so I was able to find some good academic research on child sexual abuse in Saudi Arabia, which I'm using as a proxy for the Muslim world. I imagine that if anything, Saudi Arabia would be lower than average for a Muslim nation. So it's kind of a best case scenario for what we might see in the Islamic world. Now, of course, individual countries could be higher or lower. They could be different for cultural reasons. But I think it gives a good idea, a good contrast between the West and the Islamic world. So we'll start off with the news story, and then we'll get into some very interesting statistics. Maybe I shouldn't say interesting given the nature of what we're talking about, but you get my point. All right, we'll look at some hard objective information, so we're not just looking at our biases or playing into our biases. We're gonna get the real scoop on this information, but we're going to start off with that news story. And let me just increase the font size here a bit and then share it over. I had all this set up, but then all the computer issues happened and whatnot. All right. Former Imam at Masjid and Muslim Community Center in Chatham jailed for 10 years. So this is the recent news story. The one from earlier in the year goes into more details, but this is the one that I came across, and the one that is the inspiration here. Ex-Muslim IL says in Muslim countries, rapes go severely underreported. Well, yes. That is absolutely true. But we're not going to be looking at like official crime statistics. We're looking at academic research, which is trying to determine the real number as best as possible. Even in Western countries, rapes go severely underreported, and child abuse especially goes severely underreported. But the problem is indeed even worse in Muslim societies. Should be 100 years. We'll get into that. we'll get into my thoughts on that, because doing this research, made me realize that I had some wrong information about the nature of child abusers and whatnot. A former religious leader who abused his position at a mosque and molested 4 children has been locked up. Qari Sher Mohammad, who is the Imam at the Muslim Community Center in Chatham, has been jailed for 10 years. And then we got our lovely perpetrator here, looking very smug there. Concerns about his behavior were first raised by one of his victims in 2018. So the police were aware of this individual since 2018. We'll get into that in a moment. And just some random ad there. The youngster revealed he had touched her sexually while carrying out duties connected to his role between March 2014 and October 2016. So this is the original accusation here. So from March 2014 to October 2016, he inappropriately touched an individual, a female, I believe, from the other article or other things I read. I believe she was female. From March of 2014 to October 2016, she went to the police, or her parents went to the police in 2018. He was arrested and interviewed in April of that year, 2018, but the investigation did not progress to a charge due to concerns of the potential impact a trial would have on her. Okay, so it does say her. It said youngster here, but here, her. Now, I have a few thoughts here. I don't know why it wasn't pursued in the past. I don't want to blame the police per se, because there are many possibilities. And one possibility is that the girl was traumatized and they decided it was best for her, like collectively. One possibility is that the police just didn't want to pursue it. That is definitely a possibility. I'm not ruling it out, but I'm also not saying that's the case. Another possibility is that the parents, for honor shame reasons, didn't want to pursue it, although they did go to the police in the first place. So I don't want to blame the police for not prosecuting this individual in 2016, or 2018, sorry, 2018 when it came to light, because I don't know, right? I don't know if they were able to. I don't know if it was really realistic to do so. However, I do want to know why in the world this mosque left him in charge after having these credible accusations and this police investigation into his conduct. He abused this girl, and I can say that because she'll be part of the convictions that he actually is convicted of. He abused this girl for 2.5 years, and it comes to light, and he just continues being the imam of the mosque. They just continue letting him being in this position, and they don't take any precautions because he soon is abusing new children. So I don't want to blame the girl or the parents or even the police for him not being prosecuted, but I absolutely 100% blame this mosque, the leadership, it appears to be a small organization. I don't really know if they have a board of directors or whatever. At minimum, the families who attend this mosque kept submitting to the authority of this disgusting freak. That is a major, major problem. Okay. This should not have happened. These additional victims should not have ever come to light. And you'll see that between May 2022 and December 20 2023, Mohammed sexually assaulted 3 further children and was arrested on December 11th of 2023. So at least 3 additional victims. But this is between, so she goes to the police in 2018. Maybe he's scared straight for a period of time. I suspect very, very likely more children were abused between 2018 and 2022 that, you know, people don't know about. Maybe the families took their children away, right? They started going to a different mosque, but they didn't go to the police. Maybe no one ever talked about it. Maybe the kids never told their parents and no one even knows it happened. But I can almost guarantee that this individual actually abused more than 4 people. And I don't know when he became the imam of this mosque, but if it was before March 2014, there's probably additional victims before 2014 as well. So at minimum, right? At minimum, 3 additional people because nothing was done in 2018. And again, I don't want to blame the police because I don't know if it was actually possible, right? The vast majority of sexual abuse, especially child sexual abuse, goes unprosecuted, not necessarily because the police don't want to, but often because it's just not feasible. So I don't want to blame them without knowing the details. But I 100% am going to blame this mosque for not only leaving this individual in charge, but leaving him in charge in such a way that he was able, there's no checks and balances, there was no monitoring, that he was able to sexually abuse more children. Police returned to the victim who had been the initial allegation in 2018. She was by then an adult, and she stated she wished to support a prosecution for the crimes. So she's now at least 18. We're now 2025, so she was abused 11 years, as much as 11 years ago, between 11 and 9 years ago. She's at least 18 now, so if she's 18, she was 7 to 9 at the time of the abuse, but maybe she's 25. I don't know. I don't know how she would, but she wasn't 18 in 2018. She's 18 now. Her parents no longer can say, oh, no, don't do it. She's too young. It'll be traumatic. Here's a lovely picture of the so-called mosque. It's a converted bar. Obviously, probably not very many families attend this. It's not a very big building. Still, there's no excuse, right? Whether or not it's large enough to have like proper leadership structure or not, there's no excuse for people just allowing this to go on after the first accusation. 61-year-old of Woodford Road, Forest Gate, London, was charged with multiple counts of sexually touching a child. So the guy is 61 years old, which means he was at least about 50 when he touched the first child. It would be let's put it this way. It would be very, very strange if the first time someone who is interested in touching children, that they did so was at age 50. Not impossible, but it would be very strange that, by the age 50, you're mostly past your sexual desires have diminished. Let's put it that way. Your sexual desires have diminished by age 50. So if he's doing it at age 50 and doing it at age 61, there's a pretty good chance he was doing it before age 50. Now, he might not have been an imam yet, right? He might not have been an imam of a mosque. I don't know. He's 61 now. He got a 10-year prison sentence. He'll be 71 when he gets out, and then he's subjected to additional 5 years of mandatory reporting, and basically the equivalent of a sex offender list in the United States. By age 71, he is almost certainly not really a risk to society anymore. I actually think it's a reasonable prison sentence. I mean, however, if he was younger, right? If he was younger, the fact that he abused children for at least 11 years suggests to me that maybe you should probably get, more than 11 years of prison time. During a trial at Canterbury Crown Court, and the reason I said that is that, the main determination of when someone should get out of prison is if they're still a risk to society, or one of the things is if they're still a risk to society. And I suspect at age 71, being subject to mandatory reporting under, strict guidelines, he probably won't be any risk to anyone at that age. And that's, assuming that he survives prison at all at 61, a child abuser at 61 in jail, he may not even survive prison. Who knows? Anyway, during trial at Canterbury Crown Court earlier this year, Mohammad denied the offenses, saying he would not have behaved inappropriately with the students out of fear of God. Yeah. Now, you guys in the audience will know that fear of God, like even if legitimate, and of course, he's a child abuser, criminal, convicted. I can't just take his word for it. He might not actually believe in Allah at all. Some of the research I did said that nearly half of child sex offenders intentionally chose a profession in which they would have access to children, i.e., they went into something like childcare or teaching, or, in this case, being an imam. So I don't know, right? I am not willing to grant that he actually believes in Islam, because that is reasonably possible that he went into this line of work specifically because he knew he would have access to children. Like, it's a 50-50 chance that he went into this line of work because he knew he would have access to children. However, let's say, for the sake of argument, that he legitimately believes in the truth of religion, or, of Islam. What in Islam would have told him that touching a child sexually is inappropriate? Nothing. There is absolutely nothing in his religion that would tell him that this behavior was inappropriate. Additionally, as Indiana Bones points out, his prophet, the literal best example of someone to ever live, married a 6-year-old girl and then consummated the marriage, i.e., sexually molested her, raped her at age 9. His perfect example did this. His perfect example also scolded one of his companions for marrying a adult woman and said, "Why didn't you marry a tiny girl so you could play with her like I do?" He also lusted after a little baby, literal baby crawling around on the ground, said, if she grows up, she'll be my wife. So there's nothing in his disgusting religion that would tell them this was inappropriate. Then he goes on and says he branded one of the accusers as a very rude troublemaker and claimed any touching he had simply involved hands or heads occurred in front of parents and was a mark of respect or kindness. This is a self-contradictory statement, right? The accuser is a very rude troublemaker, but he's kissing them or whatever out of respect and kindness. Yeah. Now, this is actually very telling here. He said they were a very rude troublemaker. First of all, he only said one was. That still leaves 3 other victims. But it is normally considered appropriate, or at least reasonable, for an imam to punish a troublemaking child through physical, sexual contact with the child. On March 7th, he was convicted of 16 offenses of sexual assault of a child spanning over almost a decade. I don't know why you said almost. Oh, yeah, because the most recent known touching was in 2023, so 2014 to 2023. So yes, 16 offenses of child assault this guy is convicted of. And we'll look at the article about the convictions here in a second. The court heard how the former mom had singled out his victims for extra attention by hugging them, touching under or over the clothing, and kissing them on the lips. And there's a picture of the court. One had their chest massaged as he told them it would help their physical development. So the ages of these children are not specified, but it seems they are in fact prepubescent, because an adolescent who has developed breasts, let's just say, would not need their chest massaged to help with their physical development. So this guy is rubbing the chests of prepubescent girls, telling them that he will help their breasts develop. While others were pulled onto his lap in an area he knew would be out of sight of security cameras. Another said he would hug too tight and put his hand all the way up their clothing. I don't know if that means onto their chest or onto their groin. I guess it depends on where he's reaching from. Either way, completely disgusting, obviously. Today, September 12th, Mohammed was sentenced to 10 years imprisonment. He will be subject to a sexual harm prevention order for 5 years once he is released. Detective Constable Connor Middleton said this man was in a position of authority when these appalling offenses were committed. No crap. Do we really need the constable to tell us that? Anyway. The child showed immense courage. The children showed immense courage by reporting his actions, and I would like to commend them and their parents for assisting our investigation. Mohammed is now serving a prison sentence, and he should reflect on his actions and impact they had on these vulnerable victims. The most mild possible thing that the detective could say. Oh, he should reflect upon his actions. He sexually abused these children. They might have long-term psychological damage from what he did to them. He should reflect upon his actions as he sits in prison. All right, let's look at the original article on him being convicted, because he was convicted back in March, but was just now sentenced to time. I don't know why it took so long. The original article says it should be very shortly. Don't know the details of why it took so long to sentence him. A once trusted and revered religious leader is facing a lengthy spell behind bars after being found guilty of molesting 4 children he taught at a mosque. I won't read this whole thing. A lot of it is going to be redundant, obviously. He has denied multiple abuse charges, telling a court he would not have behaved inappropriately with the students out of fear of God. Yeah, but he was convicted, so his denial is pretty meaningless. Yep, very rude troublemaker. We saw that already. But having refuted any suggestion that he had molested the children for his own sexual gratification, the jury decided otherwise. So the jury, it was a trial by jury, said, no, the evidence is there. We don't care whether you claim you didn't do this because you were sexually aroused. You abused the children either way. And he was convicted of 16 offenses of sexual assault of a child relating to 4 youngsters over a 9-year-old period. Mohammed of Forest Gate, East London, was first interviewed by police in 2018 and then again in 2023. He denied all accusations, describing himself as a fatherly figure to the children. Obviously, the kind of father who sexually touches his children. He's also a bit old to be their father, by the way. He's 60 years old, and these kids are apparently prepubescent. It's a little too old to be their father, more like their grandfather. But the court held the trust which many had in him in the role of teaching the Muslim faith and Arabic lessons at the center on Thorold Road was seriously breached when he took the opportunity to sexually assault his 4 victims. No crap. Obviously, the trust in him was seriously violated. At the start of his trial, prosecutor Tanya Robinson said despite their ordeals, which left one child in fear of going to hell, the victims had remained respectful to the Imam when they gave their honest and straightforward accounts to the police. And this does not surprise me, right? Because this is exactly what you would expect from a child abuser. He will inappropriately touch them. He will make them feel dirty and disgusting. And then he'll tell them it's their fault and they're going to hell because of their bad behavior that mandated he touch them inappropriately. They continued to see him as good, she explained. They made what we as adults would appreciate as sexual allegations, but they understandably, given their ages, seemed to not have understood the true nature of what they were describing. In other words, yet another piece of, again, the ages aren't given here, but yet another piece of evidence that these were clearly prepubescent children. They were too young to understand that the Imam Muhammad was inappropriately touching them, that he was making sexual advances, that he was doing disgusting things. They, the children, said, "Oh, he's our good Imam. This is normal. This is good." And therein lies the problem. So many do not report it. And while I'm doing this stream, right? This stream, I mean, ultimately, this is one sick individual. This ultimately doesn't reflect upon Islam by itself. But the reason I'm doing this stream is because people need to be aware how common this is. And we're going to be looking at statistics of how common it actually is. And be aware that the vast, and this applies to, the Christians, atheists, whoever in the chat as well. Be aware that it is very easy for a predator to touch your children without your children realizing that anything is going on if they're young enough. And as a result, between that and the seriousness between that and the shame of this, most instances go unreported. So many, the children never even tell their parents, and their parents never find out about it. Other times, children will tell their parents, and then their parents will cover it up and to say, "Oh, that you misunderstood. He's a good man. He wasn't trying to do anything inappropriate." I'm sure children are too scared to tell what they really feel. I mean, the one child, right, told the prosecutors, told the investigators, whatever, that they had fear of going to hell because of what this man did to them. And I'm sure that many children, many would just not realize anything inappropriate happened. Others will be afraid to tell their parents. Others will tell their parents, and their parents will be afraid to tell anyone else. Others will tell their parents, and their parents won't believe them. And this is a very, very big problem. It's a bigger problem in Islamic societies, but it's not exclusive to Islamic societies. And that's why I'm doing this stream. And we'll be looking at those stats here in a minute. Such descriptions are just what you would expect of a young child, doing no more than describing confusing events that happened to them when they didn't really know what was happening or indeed how to react to it. You may think that tells you a great deal about where the truth lies in this case. In other words, the children's testimony was completely consistent with what you would expect from a child, and they weren't being fed information by an adult. They were describing things in a way that would be different than the way an adult would describe what happened. Yes, Mary, I'm finally live. I had computer issues. Referring to Muhammad's status in the community at the time, Miss Robinson said it was perhaps no surprise that the children had not spoken out sooner or even realized that his touching was wrong. And then once again, this is why the vast majority, and we're going to look at stats in a second, but the vast majority of child abuse never is reported to authorities, including in Western countries, because the people who do it, as I just said a minute ago, 50% roughly of convicted child molesters chose their line of profession specifically to have access to children in an unchecked manner. In other words, that they were put in a position of authority where people would have an expectation that this is the kind of person that definitely would not do something inappropriate and let down their guard. And everyone needs to be aware of that. Every parent needs to be aware of that. Everyone who is part of an organization that offers programs to children needs to be aware of it. And thankfully, in the West, people have become aware of that, mostly in the last 20 to 30 years, but people have become aware of it. And now there's substantial protections in places like, scouting organizations and churches that have children's programs, schools, other extracurricular activities for children. They have protections in place to make sure that an adult is never alone with a child, because you just don't know, right? I guarantee you that you are not going to recognize someone as a child predator just by talking to them for 20 minutes. You don't know who might be a child predator. Each child was spoken to separately by police and a social worker before giving interviews that were video recorded to be played during the trial. One said they felt uncomfortable but didn't realize at first it was wrong, and that the Imam would stop what he was doing when another child came in. Big red flag there, right? Big red flag. If what he was doing was was perfectly fine, and he believed it was perfectly fine, he would not suddenly stop his actions as soon as another person, in this case a child, was in view. Child was asked about the Imam's character. They said the defendant was friendly, gave too many hugs and kisses, and spoke of being called one by one into the kitchen and giving kisses because they said the kitchen has no camera. Now, remember, there's 4 children involved here, really 3, because one is a separate incident from previously. So 3 children came forward and said they were called one by one into the kitchen for hugs and kisses. I suspect probably all the children were, and only these 3 had parents who were willing to go to the police. They said they didn't tell their parents because they didn't know it was wrong, and didn't feel the need to tell their parents because the child trusted the Imam. Ms. Robinson also told the court that given such an influential and important position, the victims had no real reason to lie about him and every reason not to lie. But Ms. Robinson added that it was holding such a revered status that enabled Muhammad to get away with it for so long. Indeed, as I said multiple times now, child molesters often intentionally take jobs that will allow them to get away with it. Police were alerted to the allegations in 2018, and Muhammad was interviewed, but the investigation did not progress to a charge at that stage. Then 5 years later, police were alerted again when further abuse came to light. And for those who were not here at the start, let me say this again. There's many possible reasons why it didn't go forward in 2018. The first victim was very young. They were afraid of how traumatic it would be for her. There was only one accusation. Everything would have been on her. The defense could have attacked her. It could have definitely subjected her to more harm. So I don't know. And I don't know what combination was the girl herself not wanting to do it, her parents not wanting to do it, and the police not wanting to do it. But it is perfectly ordinary. It's not like some Muslim bias here in this particular case. There is definitely Muslim bias in the policing, but this is very normal. Unfortunately, this is very normal for all kinds of child abuse to not move forward because of concerns for the child, concerns about actually being able to get a conviction, and so forth. However, what is completely and totally it's unfortunate, but not out of the ordinary for the investigation not to lead to charges. What is completely and totally unacceptable, and there is absolutely no excuse for, is for this guy to remain an imam, remain in this position where he is able to abuse children. As pointed out earlier, a small organization. I don't know if there's like a board of directors or any leadership or whatever. At absolute minimum, the families who attend this mosque should have banded together and said, no, this guy is not allowed to remain our imam after this happened. I guarantee, right? I guarantee that even though the investigation didn't progress to the state where the guy was actually charged, I guarantee other people in the community were aware of it. Families were aware of it, and they chose to let this guy, this sick, perverted freak, remain their imam. And there is absolutely no excuse for that. It is completely and totally unacceptable. And unfortunately, the people who made that decision are probably their children grew up before he had abused these additional children. Now, he may have abused children between 2018 and 2023. I think that's fairly probable. But the ones he was actually charged with occurred in 2022 and 2023. So they're like, who cares? Who cares if our mom's a child abuser? I'm sure some families probably laughed, right? They probably went to a different congregation or whatever. No, right? You don't just run away. You get the guy out of the situation where he's able to abuse children. I blame you. I blame the families who left this guy in charge. If there's leadership at this mosque, I 100% blame them. And they are 100% morally culpable. If there's a board of directors and whatnot, they are 100% morally culpable for this guy's further actions by them choosing to leave him there. And I would suggest if there's an actual board of directors, they could even be legally culpable for his actions. Anyway, the court heard the child's concerned parents had first informed the mosque, seeking their help and asking about CCTV cameras. So they didn't go to the police at first. They went to the mosque at first. And the mosque didn't do crap. Multiple parents are coming to mosque leadership or whatever with their concerns about their children being abused by this freak, and they don't do crap, so they end up having to go to the police. But they then reported the matters officially when they felt it was as if they were, quote, expected to wait for the Muslim community to make a decision about what should happen. In other words, whoever they went to, I don't know, again, the leadership, it appeared to be a small organization. There's probably not like a formal board of directors or whatever, but whoever they went to, dragging their feet, not really wanting to do anything about it. And so they ended up having to go to the police. Mohammed denied 17 offenses dating back to 2014 and was found guilty of all but one, which the jury had been discharged from considering during his trial. He was expected to be sentenced at the same court on May 23rd. So he's expected to be sentenced on May 23rd. For some reason, it didn't happen until this month. I don't know why. He was charged of 17 offenses. The court decided to throw out one of the offenses before it got to the jury. The jury convicted him of all 16 offenses, of which they were told to consider. So that is our situation. I'm surprised the police did anything. Well, the reason I think the reason why the police did something in this particular case is that you had multiple victims spanning a large period of time, and perhaps most importantly, unfortunately, one of the victims had grown up and could now testify as an adult, and that was probably important to the prosecution, to the police, because they knew they could get a conviction if they had an adult testifying, whereas people would not necessarily believe that kids were accurately describing the situation. So it happened in Chatham. Right. It said that at the start. Yeah. On Thor Road Low in Chatham. All right. So now some information that I learned. First, so on the sentence of 10 years, so two things. On the plausibility of previous abuses that were unreported, and on the sentence of 10 years. I looked up the statistics, and I was actually fairly surprised because I had heard other information in the past, and perhaps you've heard it as well. So I just want to set the record straight here. I had heard that the reoccurrence or recidivism, as it's officially called, of child abusers was like 90%. That is, in fact, not accurate. It is, in fact, much lower. And I'm actually quite happy that I was wrong about that information, that child abusers are not compulsively recommitting crimes. So we have this article here, and it actually depends. And it turns out that there's actually at least two very distinct kinds of child abuse. A large percent, the vast majority of child abuse is more opportunistic than, let's say, psychologically motivated by attraction to children, in that it is only done to people who are family members or who are essentially family members because they are close family friends. And that is the vast majority of cases. And these types of offenders rarely reoffend after being released from jail. So that would be this extended incest child molesters. As you can see, only 13% reoffend within 15 years. This article is about sexual offenders in general. So all sexual offenders, this is going to be, adult on adult sexual offenders, adult on adult rapists, 24% reoffend in this particular study. And then there's a very interesting difference between people who molest girls and people who molest boys. These would be the other class. So the vast majority of child abuse, including sexual child abuse, is done by family members or people who are essentially family members because they're close friends of the family. And in those cases, I'll look, and I have some other statistics on this as well, but in those cases, they quite often only have one lifetime victim. The other class is completely different. The class that this imam, or so-called imam, would fall into, people who molest people who are not people they know intimately, and not members of their family and whatnot. And in this case, girl child molesters reoffend at 16% rate, so still extremely low, but boy child molesters reoffend at a 35% rate over the period of 15 years. And in the other study I have, breaks this down, or he looks at this a little bit differently, goes over a longer period of time, and it's probably somewhere around 50% of child sexual abusers reoffend over their lifetime. What's more disturbing than the reoffend rate is the number of victims. If we hop over to this article here. Oh, wait, sorry. It's not a web page, so I got to re-share that. It's a PDF because it's a journal article that I downloaded. If we jump over to this journal article here, how much child sexual abuse is below the surface, i.e. Is not reported to legal authorities and is not prosecuted, and how can adults help identify it? So in this article, here is the extremely, I know the text is small. If you can't read it, you're just gonna have to trust me. I can't really make it bigger because then it will scroll off from side to side. But because it's a PDF, it's not going to wrap the text in a different place than it's already wrapped. This data also suggests that over 95% of cases of child sexual abuse is never disclosed to authorities. 95%. And keep in mind, this is a study of Western nations. 95% of child sexual abuse is not reported to authorities. Other studies that I saw said like 80%. Even if it's 80 and not 95, the vast majority of abuse is going unreported. So I wanted to highlight that. And then down here, it's talking about the different types of offenders. Oh, you know what? I think it might actually have been, is it this one? Yeah, it is this one. Okay. Sorry, I need to find the exact part of it. Let me get my notes and so I can search for the right words. Oh, it was actually that other article. It was actually the web page I had up a second ago. In any case, it says that there is. Wait, no. Sorry, I was searching for the wrong thing. Okay, so it's actually a different web page that I hadn't pulled up. Let me pull that up here. Give me 1 second. Sorry with the with the computer issues, I had all this stuff ready to go, and then I apparently forgot to reopen this article before we went live. All right. Resharing that. All right, here. So this is an article published by the Australian government on misconceptions about child sexual abuse. And in fact, so the myth is that all child molesters are the same, and it's saying, in fact, that is not the case. So those who do incest-related child sexual abuse have a median of 1.3 victims for females or 1.2 victims for males. So in other words, the majority only have one victim. However, in cases of incest, they abuse the child on average 45 times before they are, either before they are caught or, before the child ages to where they are no longer a viable victim, because this is not just like cases that are legally prosecuted. These are studies based on, victim testimony. And male targets average of 36.5 acts per victim. So small number of victims, but abused an extremely large number of times over the history of the abuse. In the case of non-incest perpetrators, they had a median of 1.3 victims for those who target female children and 4.4 for those who target male children. For whatever reason, abuse of children from the sickest individuals is focused more on males than females. Now this is the median here. So even in this case, right, the number of many people only have one victim. However, the mean average is 19.8 and 100 for females and 150 for males. In other words, there's a small number of perpetrators who abuse an extremely, extremely, extremely large number of children, which greatly increases the average. However, the number of acts per victim is less than 2, whether for males or females. So they abuse a large number of children, but only once to twice, usually per child. And yeah, one victim is definitely too many. And that's why I'm doing this, right? That's why I'm doing this, is to highlight this, bring attention to this. But I think it's important to understand that there is actually a substantial difference between the kind of person who targets someone in their own family or a family friend and the kind of person who targets, not strictly speaking, strangers, but, children that they don't have a familial relationship with. People like this Imam who target children in a group congregate setting. And this kind of person targets a large number of people a small number of times. So what does this mean for our Imam, right? Why did I go through and I have more statistics about Saudi Arabia, which we'll get to in a second, to look at a proxy for the Muslim world compared to the West. But why did I go through these numbers? Because these are related to our Imam. He was convicted of abusing 4 children. 1 from 2014 to 2016 and 3 from 2022 to 2023. Were there more between 2022 and 2023? Quite possibly. I don't know. There might have only been a handful of children in total that attended this mosque. Were there more between 2016 16 and 2022. And were there more before 2014? Highly, highly likely. Obviously, I can't say for certain. I don't know for certain, but highly, highly likely based on these numbers that there was more. So, what does this mean about his sentence of 10 years? I have mixed feelings about it, but only because he's 61. If he was 40, I'd say 10 years is way too short. If he was 20, I'd say 10 years is way too short. Because he's 61, I don't think it's all that probable that he'll abuse any more children after he gets out of jail. And for that reason, maybe it's a reasonable sentence. However, in general, I feel like, this is because of the severity of the crime and the possibility, or the strong possibility in the case of specifically in the case of people who abuse non-family members. Family members reoccurrence is low. Maybe a short a short 10-year sentence is reasonable. However, in the case of people who abuse multiple children who are not family members, there is a very high case of reoccurrence. The other study I looked at said that lifetime reoccurrence was probably in excess of 50%. And given that 95% of cases, or up to 95%, other studies said only 80, but up to 95% of cases are unreported. The 52% reoccurrence comes from study. All these research numbers, they don't come from crime reports, right? They don't come from official statistics, right? They're coming from interviews with offenders and interviews with victims. But they said 50+% lifetime reoccurrence, which even though it's based on studying the offender themselves, it's probably actually higher, right? It's probably actually higher. Yeah, but I yes and no, right? Okay, so my thought, as of yesterday, my thought definitely would have been that reoccurrence is almost 100% chance. But when I looked at all crime recidivism stats, age is highly deterministic over whether people commit more crimes after they're released from jail. The older you are, the less likely you are to commit more crimes, regardless of the nature of the crimes. And with sexual crimes specifically, your sexual desire, regardless of whether it's for adults or children, diminishes greatly with age. So I don't know if he would want to, but more importantly, I don't think he would have the opportunity, right? I pretty much think that he wouldn't have the opportunity. And I understand the sentiment, Samuel. I absolutely do. And this would be my first instinct as well. If they can't guarantee the predator won't reoffend, you wrote will, but you meant won't reoffend when they get out, they should never get out. But see, here's the thing. You can't guarantee that any random person off the street won't become a child predator, and you're not going to put them in jail. And if the reoccurrence rate is similar to the general population, then there's not really any justification for keeping someone in jail just because they offended in the past after they've served a reasonable sentence. Now, so I don't think you can argue for this from reoccurrence, right? I don't think you can argue for life sentences from reoccurrence. You'd have to if you want to argue for a life sentence, it's going to have to be because of the severity of the crime. That reoccurrence is irrelevant, is what I would say. That if you want to argue for a life sentence, it's going to have to be like, this crime is so severe, and I would be sympathetic to this, by the way. You're gonna have to do it not from reoccurrence. You're gonna have to do it from the severity of the crime in and of itself. That because you're potentially ruining a child's life, that it needs to have a life sentence. That you could argue. reoffense, I don't think you can, because when we look at the general stats, we're going to see that child abuse is extremely more common than you probably think. And thus, the reoccurrence rate is actually not really out of line with the general population, except in this case of people like this Imam who abuse strangers, or not strictly speaking strangers, but who abuse people who are not family members. All right, let me get the study back up here. So that's what I consent is not a basis for permitting something. I hope that wasn't directed to me. I didn't say anything about consent. Yeah, definitely. Victimized children will never say no. I didn't say anything about that, though. I'm just saying that if you want to be honest with the statistics, you need to argue for long sentences based on the severity of crime, not reoccurrence, because I believe that reoccurrence was in excess of 90% based on things I'd heard in the past. I imagine there's a good chance that people in the audience do as well. And it's simply not true. It's simply not true. And in a way, this is actually great relief to me. It sounds strange, but in a way, this is actually a great relief to me, because what it means is that child sexual predators do not feel compelled to abuse children, which means it's preventable, right? If as we're told, that, someone has this pathological desire that they cannot overcome, this, abnormal but uncontrollable attraction to children, and they can't overcome it, then you would expect, indeed, that reoccurrence would be very, very, very high. However, since reoccurrence is not, I would suggest this means that in nearly all cases, child predators are choosing, obviously there's societal influences and their background and whatnot, but they're choosing to do the acts they do in a very real sense, not just like, I choose to act out on my desires, but actually, you're choosing to put yourself into a position where you have those kinds of. Okay, yeah, you weren't talking to me. I was just making sure. Where they would not have those kinds of desires. So that means that, after being separated from children for a period of 10 years or whatever we decide is appropriate punishment, and I'm not making a judgment on what is appropriate punishment, but I just said 10 years since that's what this guy got, that after being separated from children for 10 years, not seeing, not having access to children, not having access to images of children, that they could potentially overcome that and not even have the desire to abuse more children. Snoopy says chemical prevention, and so chemical castration would also be something worth considering. I know that I'm almost certain that the courts in the United States would not allow it. They would call it cruel and unusual punishment. I don't necessarily think it is. In this particular case. In general, sure. I don't think that criminals should be castrated just for being criminals. But in this particular case, I don't know. It seems like a reasonable thing, right? It doesn't seem that outrageous to me. All right. So with the specifics of this case out of the way, I now want to go to general statistics on child abuse. And we're going to start with this study, which was on the United States and Canada. And then, one second. All right, sorry about that. Because frankly, I was quite surprised at just how common child sex. So actually, sorry, I should get to the definition at the start here first, because different studies you're going to find different numbers, because there isn't like, one singular definition of what constitutes sexual abuse of children. But in this one does a very good job, and the one from Saudi Arabia uses a very similar definition of breaking child sexual abuse down into 4 different contexts. In general, we can suggest there are 4 types of behavior that should be considered as child sexual abuse, namely non-contact, class 1, genital touching, class 2, attempted vaginal and anal penetrative acts, class 3, and vaginal and penetrative acts, class 4. And this is going to be very important when we look at the Saudi Arabia data. And actually, this is fine. It's right here in the abstract, the numbers that I wanted to look at. There's more details about these numbers in the body of the article, of course, but this is the takeaway. From the look at all the research, this is a meta study here. From the research to date, approximately 15% of girls aged between 2 and 17 experience higher impact child sexual abuse. So everything except for non-contact. So genital touching or attempted rape or rape. Approximately 15% of girls experience higher impact child sexual abuse over their lifetime, and approximately 6% of boys, with the reasonable range being between 12 and 18 for girls and 5 and 8 for boys. Again, this is United States and Canada, which we'll use as a proxy for the West in general. And this is extremely, extremely surprising to me, just how prevalent child sexual abuse is. This means that 1 out of every 6 females who lives to adulthood, which is, of course, 99% of people in modern society, 1 out of every 6 girls and 1 out of every 19 boys or so will have experienced sexual abuse. Now, I can pretty much guarantee you have more than 6 female friends or acquaintances, and you probably have more than 19 male acquaintances or friends. In other words, there are almost certainly people in your friend group who have experienced child sexual abuse. 15% may not sound all that large. We started, okay, sorry, from Jamiron. Are we talking about a specific case of the PDF's behavior? No, we started with a specific case. I went through that, and now I'm going on to the actual. You said 15%, but I heard 50. Yeah, not 50, not 50, not half. But 15% of girls, of females, experience abuse before the age of 18. Obviously, females can also experience abuse as adults, but we're talking about child abuse here, right? So 15% of girls, rough, best guess estimate of the true number. Then this is an attempt to do the true number. And remember, this doesn't include non-contact. So if you were including non-contact, it would be higher. So that would be non-contact would be, inappropriate language, sexualized comments, child pornography, making children undress in front of you, but not actually touching them. A variety of things could be in non-contact. But we're talking about physical contact. We're talking about sexual assault, whether just touching. You say 15%, it must be higher than that. Well, reported is less than 1%. Reported abuse is less than 1%. And I certainly hope it's not higher than 15%. That's 1 out of every 6. 15 doesn't sound like that much until you realize what it actually means. That's 1 out of every 6 people. That's literally several million people in the United States. Let's see. Yeah. About 10 million women in the United States experienced child sexual abuse as a child. No. Sorry. That's way off. that would be approximately 10 million boys. Approximately 10 million boys. Probably more like 8 million. As far as girls go, it would be much higher. Let's see. About 27 million. About 27 million women in the United States alone experienced sexual abuse as a child. And that is extraordinary to me. So the boys is 6%, and that would be more like 8 to 9 million men in the United States experienced abuse as a child. This is extremely common. So here's a different way to put it. So let's say an average class size is 30 people, 15 boys and 15 girls. That means that probably close to 2 point something girls. So let's just say 2. And one of the boys has experienced or will experience sexual abuse. And so you could go to an elementary school, go to a random classroom, and 3 kids in that classroom are going to experience sexual abuse, either already have or are going to in the future. And we're only talking about contact here, right? We're only talking about physical contact. So the numbers here are quite extraordinary, in my opinion. They are way, way higher than I would have expected. Now, keep in mind that the vast majority of this, like 80 to 90%, 80 to 85, let's say 80 to 85% of this is by relatives and family friends, but it's extremely common. Now, the other thing I wanted to look at here, because this is going to be highly relevant when we go to the Saudi Arabia study, is this little chart here on the rates of the different types of sexual abuse. And most importantly, for purposes here, so these first ones are officially reported crime statistics. And then this one is one particular study, just to use as an example for estimating the total. It's not broken down by gender. The Saudi Arabia is going to be broken down by gender. But for purposes here, we just want to estimate how much of child sexual abuse is actually penetrative, right? It's successful rape of children. And thankfully, not most, but at least a much larger percentage of these cases are actually reported to the police. Very, 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 very few of mere touching is reported to the police, but a good chunk of actual rape is reported to the police. And that makes sense, because if your child is raped, they're much, much more likely to come forward. You're much, much more likely to do something about it. Still, a good portion of even that is covered up for one reason or another. The child doesn't report it, or the parents don't believe the child, or the parents choose not to go to the police anyway. In any case, regardless, if you look at the numbers here, a little less than 10% of all child abuse is penetrative. We'll just use 10% as a proxy because that's easy for the math. It's actually a little bit less than 10%. So that means if we go back to these numbers, about 1.5% of girls will have been raped as a child. So, 1 out of 75 girls will have been raped as a child, and 0.5% of boys, so 1 out of 200 boys will have been raped as a child in the United States and Canada, because that's what this study is looking at. Those are the numbers. Those are going to be the crucial comparison numbers. 1.5% for girls, 0.5% for boys. Now we're going to go to the study I found about Saudi Arabia. Long-term consequences of child sexual abuse in Saudi Arabia, a report from National Study. I think that, if anything, Saudi Arabia is going to be below the Islamic average. That because it is industrialized, because it is attempting to modernize itself and be a member of the top tiered countries. I could say first world, but that's not actually a correct definition of the term. Point being that Saudi Arabia is less backward than most of the Islamic world. So if anything, their rate is going to be lower. And we're going to use this as a stand-in. This isn't going to be officially reported numbers. Officially reported numbers are going to be approximately 0%. This is a study that did interviews with numerous children, and you can read all about their methodology if you are interested. I gave you the title. You can look it up. It's available for free on the web. Suffice it to say, I think that this is a reasonably decent study. I think that this is a reasonably good attempt to look at this. All right, so this is only looking at contact, or as the other one called it, higher impact child sexual abuse. The prevalence of lifetime child sexual abuse contact form was 20.8%. So this is the comparison to your 15/6 number. You average that out, it's about 10%. So from this number alone, you're looking at approximately double. However, the really crucial number, I think, is going to be the penetrative number, because at least in the United States, only 10% of sexual abuse was successfully penetrative. Prevalence 20%. So that's roughly double. Males 12.1. So for some reason they broke the 20 down into its components instead of giving the rate for men, but you can roughly double that. 24% of boys experienced abuse, in females at 17%. So females actually fairly similar, boys 5 times higher. Approximately 10% of participants reported experience of penetrative sexual abuse and 11% non-penetrative. And this is actually broken down by gender, which we'll look at it's in the text, but we'll look at the little chart. The little chart is I was going to say nicer, but given the nature of the material, I'll just say easier to read. So the darker color, the bluish color is boys, and the pinkish, purplish, lighter color is girls. So the crosshash area were experienced this type of sexual abuse multiple times. The solid color is a single time. Add those together, 12.7% of male children in Saudi Arabia have experienced penetrative child abuse. Remember, that was 0.5% in America and Canada. 12.7% of boys in Saudi Arabia. And there's a reversal of the pattern here. And the reason why is because it's harder to get access to girls, not because people don't desire girls. It's harder to get access to girls, so the rate for girls is somewhat lower than boys. 12.7% of boys, 1 out of every 8 boys in Saudi Arabia is successfully raped. Which, now you're looking at this and you're saying that, and then you look at the total rate, you go from, 12.7 to 24. And I agree 100% that 0.5% is still a lot. I'm not diminishing that at all. What I'm saying is the problem is massively, that 0.5% is a big problem. Right? Again, that's part of the reason I'm doing this. So everyone, including Christians, atheists, agnostics, whoever's watching the stream, are aware of just how prevalent child sexual abuse actually is, so they can take account of that. But remember, the total sexual abuse in the United States and Canada is 10 times higher than the penetrative. And here it's only twice as high. And I think there are two possibilities. There's two logical possibilities. It's literally on your screen. It's a scientific study. I'll scroll back up. You can read the whole article if you want. Prevalence of sexual abuse among secondary school students in Saudi Arabia is the name of the article. You can read the whole article if you want. I'm just going over the conclusions. There's two possibilities. Either people in Saudi Arabia are less interested in just touching children's genitalia and whatnot, or this number is vastly underreported. These numbers of touching are vastly underreported not because these aren't official crimes, because the children, even under interview, even in this controlled, protected environment where they feel safe, don't understand that they were inappropriately touched, that it's just so normalized that they don't even understand that what happened to them was sexual abuse. I suspect it's the latter, and thus these numbers are way too low, which is why I'm focusing on penetrative. But either way, this number is highly, highly problematic. So what you're talking about is that boys are roughly 25 times more likely to be raped in Saudi Arabia than in the United States. For girls, it's 9%, which means they're roughly 6%, 6 times as likely to be raped. And again, the reason isn't because people don't want girls in Saudi Arabia, that they only want boys. It's because girls are more protected, right? As any Muslim will proudly tell you, girls are highly protected. Despite high protection, they're still 6 times more likely to be raped than girls in the United States and Canada. Let that sink in for you, Muslims. And again, I suspect Saudi Arabia is probably substantially lower than the average Muslim country, and certainly much lower than a place like Pakistan. Almost 1 out of 10, 1 out of 11, say, of all girls are raped before they become an adult in Saudi Arabia. 1 out of every 8 boys in Saudi Arabia is raped before they become an adult. If we look at all kinds of child sexual abuse, this is only the most severe kind, right? We also have attempted rape that failed, and then you have sexual touching, and then you have which this study doesn't even look at, but you have non-contact sexual abuse as well. If we looked at all forms, it's not hard to see that probably the majority of children in Saudi Arabia are sexually abused at some point in some way. I'm not Catholic, so alhamdulillah, we don't have such an issue. You clearly have such an issue. You clearly have such an issue. The sexual abuse that took place in the Catholic Church in the 60s, 70s, 80s, in a little bit into the 90s, and then became a major scandal because society, Western society, said this is completely and totally unacceptable, and the church has taken steps to root that out. They've taken steps to root it out. But even in the height of the abuse scandal, I guarantee it was nowhere near 1 out of every 8 Catholic boys or 1 out of every 11 Catholic girls that was being raped. It was probably 1%, maybe 2 at the absolute most. It was never on the scale of the problem you have, and it's acknowledged as a problem in the West. It's not acknowledged as a problem at all in your society, as you yourself are saying, oh, the Catholics, it's all the Catholics' fault. And by the way, yes, Catholics happen to be the ones that got implicated in this. But the same kind of sexual abuse, of course, occurred at Protestant churches. It, of course, occurred in schools. It, of course, occurred in scouting organizations, in all kinds of extracurricular activities for children, because it was below the surface. It was hidden. People didn't realize there was a prevalence of problem. By chance, or because of anti-Christian sentiment or an anti-Catholic sentiment, specifically in society, the Catholic Church became associated with this. But the problem there is not different than the problem of anywhere else. And it has been addressed in Western society. I think we need to do more. I absolutely 100% think we need to do more to make it more apparent to people just how much of this is a problem, because that's how you end this problem, is making people aware, making parents aware that this can happen to their children, because people will say, oh, it's not going to happen to my children. The leader of my community is just such a good guy. He would never do such a thing. We need to be aware this is a problem. You, Fatima, you need to acknowledge that this is a massive problem in Saudi Arabia and probably everywhere in the Islamic world, including in Islamic communities in the West. It's a massive problem, and it gets covered up. It gets pretended like nothing ever happened. Yeah, Mary says it wasn't even 1%. It probably was. I mean, who knows, right? Who knows what the actual extent was? Because obviously we don't know. The criminal cases were generally less than 1%. We don't know what the actual extent was. By all indications, from my previous research, by all my indications, it was less than society in general. Let's put it that way. It was less than society in general. And I'm talking about victims, not perpetrators. So the perpetrators would be much smaller percentage than the victim percentage, because one perpetrator can have many victims. But it probably wasn't even 1%. It probably wasn't even 1%, as Mary said, because that's the general. If that's the general rate, and most of it's being done by families, it's probably less. Yeah, that would mean 1 out of 100 Catholic kids were molested. Again, the numbers are much, much higher than you would expect in general, right? 15% of girls and 6% of boys experience molestation. Actual rape, right? Actual rape, 0.5% boys, 1.5% girls. Society in general. What it was in the Catholic Church, I don't know. I suspect my previous research tells me that was almost certainly lower than the general population. But it became a major scandal because in Christianity and Western societies based on Christian moral values, we recognize child abuse as a very, very serious crime. That's why it became a major scandal. Not because it was super, super common. It was happening to everyone. No. Everyone was doing it. No. It became a major scandal because we recognize it's a major problem. Here, you're acting like you have no problem when 10% of children are being literally raped. Not just touched, literally raped. And you're like, oh, we don't got a problem. I know Catholics never know a Catholic was molested by a priest. I have 2 nieces who are groomed by public school teachers. Yeah. If a child is abused, it's going to be usually a family member or a close family friend. Second most likely category is probably a school teacher. It might be a child care provider, babysitter, daycare professional, whatever. It's going to be close between a child care provider and a public school teacher. And then much lower down, you're going to find clergy, right? Whether Catholic or Protestant, much lower down, you're going to find clergy. Did it occur? Yes, it occurred. Was it a problem? Yes, it was. Do I condemn it? Absolutely. But let's not pretend that because a small number of Catholic priests abused children, that you don't have a massive problem in your Islamic societies. I'm not excusing what happened, and no doubt continues to happen in much smaller numbers in America. You are excusing what's happening in your societies. That is a problem. That is a huge, massive problem. Is that net or per capita? I mean, it's percentage. Per capita is per thousand. It's effectively per capita. Now, that comment from Mary here earlier. Do the math. 10 times 2 times 10 is 200. Muslim men are 200 times more likely to rape a child than a Catholic priest. It's a scandal because it should never happen. But in Islamic countries, it's normal. And that's my point here. Right? That's my point here. That it does ultimately reflect on Islam. The behavior of an individual like the Imam that we looked at in the beginning doesn't by itself reflect on Islam. The behavior by an individual Catholic priest or Protestant minister doesn't reflect by itself on Christianity. The behavior of an individual school teacher by his or herself doesn't by itself reflect on all school teachers. However, the fact that you have people like Fatima, who are the vast majority of Muslims, who pretend there's no problem, or legitimately think this is fine, does reflect on Islam. The extreme high prevalence in society as a whole does reflect on Islam. And why does it reflect on Islam? Because we know there's nothing in Islam that forbids this kind of behavior. And this reflects on Islam itself because it's not prevented by Islam. Look, the rate for girls is lower because of all the extreme efforts to protect girls. Because of all the extreme efforts to protect girls, cloister them away, because after all, the only purpose of a female is for sexual pleasure anyway. And, the vast majority of parents care greatly about their children, whether they're Muslim or not, and they don't want their child to be abused. So they go through great efforts to protect their girls. Even with those great protections, still 1 out of every 11 girls is raped. Probably in this case, although this study doesn't go into it, probably mostly not by relatives, probably mostly by teachers and whatnot. And because boys don't have the same protection and they're more easily available, and the 6 perverts who have an Islamic mindset are not reformed by the saving grace of Jesus Christ, 1 out of every 8 boys is raped. It experiences penetrative sexual abuse. That is insane. That is absolutely insane. There are 1.8 billion Muslims in the world. If this is the same rate in other countries, and it may be, will be higher, that means that there are 72 million Muslim men who were raped as children. No, sorry. I apologize. 72 million Muslim women. 110 million Muslim men. Almost 200 million Muslims were raped as children based on these numbers. And you think you don't have a problem because you can point to a dozen priests who were convicted of child abuse. Really? Really? Let me take some super chats.
من ذا الذي يقرض الله قرضا حسنا? Who is going to give Allah a good loan? Ya akhwati, this verse puts shame in my heart. My Lord is asking for a loan. Nothing's wrong with that guy. He has ability, but only a little bit of cash flow problems. He just needs a little bit of money right now. So give to Allah. Don't ask for anything back, guys.
Songs of Release says, it wouldn't let me send what I wanted to say. Here's $20 and a hearty thank you for covering the story. Appreciate your support there. YouTube is going to block a large percentage of comments that would refer to child sexual abuse. This video is going to be demonetized. If it hasn't already, it probably already has. I, of course, don't care and haven't looked, but it will be demonetized. This video is a non-monetizable video. If you talk about child abuse, even to oppose it, it is non-monetizable. And I understand why. Advertisers don't want their products associated with child abuse in any way, even people speaking against it. I get it. It does have a cooling effect, though, and discourage people from talking about this kind of thing. So I appreciate your financial support. And obviously, I'm not here for money. So I don't care if it gets demonetized. I'm just glad that YouTube won't block the topic entirely. It could just forbid the topic entirely. And when I demonetize it, fine. As long as I get to talk about it, right? As long as the video is not censored. Because this is an important topic we need to talk about. Next super chat.
Every single person that donates, inshallah, you're going to get a reward. You know what? Forget donate. Invest. You invest in your hereafter. Forgive me for pranking you guys, but I had to. Yeah, I'm the king of clickbait. Goodbye.
Heretic perjure. This is a really important subject that we all need to face. Amen. Amen. That is why we're discussing it again. Even though even though this was framed as a discussion of this one particular Imam, and we looked at the Islamic statistics. To me personally, the Western statistics are just as shocking. That such a large percentage of girls and even boys experience sexual abuse during their lifetime. It is way too high. And I am actually encouraged by the statistic that says that recidivism, reoccurrence of abuse is not nearly as high as I thought, because that means that the first case is also equally preventable. And how is it preventable? If most of these crimes are crimes of opportunity, they are, in many cases, they're premeditated. The people specifically sought out those opportunities, but nonetheless, they are crimes of opportunity. And you take that opportunity away, you take away the opportunity for non-parents to be alone with children, and the problem is vastly reduced. Vastly reduced. This doesn't mean that parents have to have constant supervision of their children. What it means is that organizations need to have procedures in place to ensure that at least 2 adults are present at all times. That an adult is never alone with a child or multiple children, that 2 adults are present. And if there's 2 adults present, the chance of sexual abuse plummets, because everyone knows that sexual abuse of children is one of, if not the single most offensive, repulsive, disgusting things in our society. And no one is going to, or virtually no one, I mean, there might be, 1 out of 10,000 chance or something of 2 adults being willing to conspire. But the odds are incredibly small that the adult will even raise the possibility or test the waters with another adult present. That's how you prevent it, is you make sure that there are organizations that provide services for children, ensure that there is at least 2 adults present. So Snoopy says 2 teachers instead of 1. A full classroom setting, right? A full classroom setting obviously can just have 1 teacher, but a teacher should not be given the opportunity to do one-on-one instruction with children, or, 1-on-2 instruction with children. And that should be prevented by design. And that's how you prevent this from happening. All right, let me take the other 2 super chats from Tommy, the son of Allah.
I can't answer this question in a 20-minute interview, nor is it wise to do so, which is why I never brought this topic up myself. You will not find one lecture of mine about this issue. It should never be brought up in public. And I don't like these idiots, and they are idiots, wallahi. This is not something you discuss amongst the masses, ya akhi. It's not wise. I encourage anybody who is really interested to go deep to take the class. I do this class. It'll be 1 year later.
Very appropriate. Very appropriate there from Yasser Qadi. Yeah, and I imagine you won't find one lecture of Yasser Qadi talking about child sexual abuse in the Arab world and how to prevent it. You should find a lecture about him, but I bet you're not going to. And that attitude, although obviously he's not literally talking about this subject, that attitude, we shouldn't talk about this. We should sweep it under the rug. We should pretend it never happens. Is exactly why it happens. Tommy says 12.7%, verse 15%, as many boys successfully raped as girls touched in the West. Am I reading that right? Almost, yeah. You're not reading it wrong. 12.7% in this particular study of boys were successfully raped, and 15% of girls experienced some form Mostly touching. It'd probably be like 14% touching, 1% attempted penetrative or penetrative abuse. Almost. Also from Tommy.
If it's my wife, why are you interfering?
And to be clear, although child marriage is allowed in Islam, it's I'm sure it's forbidden in Saudi Arabia. Maybe not at like age 16. I don't know what the minimum age is in Saudi Arabia, but like actual child marriage is definitely forbidden in Saudi Arabia. That's not to say it doesn't happen, right? And it's not to say it doesn't happen without official state recognition. But these would be children. These would mostly be children who are being touched by, imams, teachers, people like that. And this would not normally be a situation where someone has a pseudo marriage. Not that that would make it any more acceptable. I'm just saying for clarification, that wouldn't be what would be the result of these numbers. However, if Muhammad's teachings were widely practiced, then yeah, you would probably have close to 100% of girls who were penetrated before they turned 18, because they would be quote unquote married at a, third. Generally, people aren't all that interested in 9-year-olds, unlike Muhammad, but they would be married at, 14, 15, and obviously would be penetrated before they're 18. So it would be 100%. Don't know about boys, but at least for girls, it wouldn't be close to 100%. Majority is fatherless kids who are preyed on. I think you mean in the West, because obviously it's not going to just be fatherless kids in Islamic societies. 10% are not kids don't have single mothers in Islamic countries. I think you mean in the West, and that's probably true. Predators aren't stupid. They're going to go after the easiest targets, the targets that are least likely to get them in trouble. They know the consequences of their actions. They're going to go after the most vulnerable targets, and that is generally going to be fatherless kids. In Islamic countries, the issue is that every stranger and even the friends would attack a weak boy in Islamic countries. Yes. Yeah, I mean, the numbers show it, right? The numbers show it, that obviously not every boy experiences this, but it's quite clear that a large, extremely large, disturbing percentage do. And, the ones who are being raped by adults are probably also being raped by older adolescents. It's probably the same boys. They're taking it both from adults and from older adolescents, especially the boys, right? The girls, maybe not so much, but especially the boys. You get branded as the available boy through no fault of your own, and you get passed around. We got another freaking moron here. Islam is the ultimate truth. In Holy Catholic Church, there's so much scandal. Yeah, there's a scandal, or there was, at least. It has pretty much been dealt with. But there was a scandal. You know why? Because the behavior was completely and totally unacceptable. And we all agree with that. Catholics agree with that. Non-Catholics agree with that. Non-Christians agree with that. But it was less than 1%, most likely. Again, we're talking about very small numbers. It's hard to get super precise, but less than 1%, most likely, of children in the Catholic Church were sexually abused by a priest or other authority figure within the church. Meanwhile, in Islamic societies, you got 12.7% of boys being literally raped, not just sexually abused, but being literally penetratively raped, and 8.2% of girls experiencing the same. That is at minimum 10 times greater than the abuse in the West. But you don't care. You don't care. Islam is the ultimate truth. Wake up. If you have a child, there is a very substantial chance they are going to be sexually abused. Way, 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 way greater than if you were a Catholic. And this reflects the abuse of isolated Catholics that became a scandal because it was not appropriate, shouldn't reflect negatively upon the Catholic Church because they did something about it. They took steps to prevent this from happening again. You may have to type it again. It might be too old. Let me check. Nope, it's still here. So if we do the math, all right, we do the math here. 10 times 2 times 10, all those numbers, you can go back and watch the stream, see where all those numbers come from. That's 200. Muslim men are 200 times more likely to rape a child than a Catholic priest. I'm saying at absolute minimum 10. And that's being extremely, extremely, extremely generous. This 200 is probably closer to the truth. 200 times more likely. And your response is, oh, Islam's the truth because Catholic priests, blah, 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 blah. You got a massive problem, buddy. You got a massive, massive problem. Islam is the ultimate truth. And unlike Catholicism, where because the church, once they were aware of it at a high enough level, did something to stop this from ever happening again, it should no longer reflect, maybe in the 1980s, it reflected negatively on the Catholic Church. It no longer reflects negatively on the Catholic Church. Meanwhile, you got a massive problem in your Islamic countries. You don't seem to care. That is a massive reflection on your religion. It's partially a reflection because it happens, but it's mostly a reflection because you don't care and you don't do anything about it. Link Hatun stream with Adam Seeker on masjid abuse leaks in Pakistan. I will look for that. We're going to wrap up here in a minute. So I'll put a link to that in the chat. DCCI, Adam Seeker. Abuse. I'm looking for it. If people can watch that next if for some reason and you want to learn more about child sexual abuse. I got the link. I'm going to put it in now, and I'll put it again at the very end of the stream. I know that I know no one wants to watch this, right? We had low viewership numbers today. I completely expected that. I get it. People don't want to deal with this topic, right? They don't want to watch this kind of material. They don't want to think about it. It's important that we do anyway, right? It's important that we do anyway, because we're talking about real children here. We're talking about real abuse. And the only way to reduce abuse, the only way to have a better society is to talk about it. Okay, you sick, disgusting pervert. If you put candy on the floor with no wrapper, flies will eat it. It's the same with women who wear revealing clothes. It attracts men to them. Let me just tell you once again what we're actually talking about here. In Islamic countries, where girls are put in a wrapper, to use your words, 8.2% of them are raped. In Western countries where they're not put in a wrapper, less than 2% are raped. Boys who don't even enter into your stupid little equation here, 12.7% of boys in Muslim countries are raped. Less than 0.5% in America is raped. Your logic, your prophet's stupidity has absolutely nothing to do with the subject or the problem. I guess it has something to do with the subject. It has nothing to do with the problem. You can say it's because lack of hijab. And also have some responsibility for your own actions. Tommy says a naked woman twerking in your face is any more justification for you harming her than if she's wearing a burqa. And I'm going to tell you, Islam is definitely not the truth in any sense of the word. I would not rape a naked woman who was twerking or dancing or otherwise trying to sexualize me. I wouldn't even have sex with her, let alone rape her. And you are justifying the rape of girls who are fully clothed. Do you understand what a sick, disgusting, perverted freak you are?
Absolutely sickening and disgusting.
Absolutely sickening and disgusting is what you are, is what your religion is your attempt to justify this. We are here talking about this to prevent this problem, and you come in thinking you're defending your religion and showing exactly what the problem is. There is massive sexual abuse of children in the Islamic world.
There's abuse happening.
And you simply do not care in any way. I think Mary sent you to timeout, which I'm fine with. So you can't respond. I don't want any responses from you anyway. Tell you some people. All right. Thank you for tuning in today. Again, I know this is a tough topic. I know this isn't what people want to watch. I'm not going to do this every day by any means, but I think this is a topic we need to talk about occasionally, despite our discomfort in doing so. Or frankly, because of our discomfort in doing so, we need to talk about this topic on a regular basis, because that is how we address the problem, is dealing with our discomfort for talking about it. Thank you all for tuning in. We'll be back tomorrow with Mary. We'll do a stream on how to avoid improper thinking, how to avoid logical traps, how to get yourself involved with cult-like thinking. In other words, we're going to be talking about how no-mo arguments spread. Islam is the Truth is now called Maggot. He changed his username to Maggot, or you called him a maggot? So whoever said that Tommy, son of Allah, is a troll, he was not pretending to be a Muslim. The guy I was talking about was named like Islam is the ultimate truth. And the comment I pulled up from Tommy was saying that you shouldn't be abusing women no matter what. That them not wearing a burqa is not a justification. Yeah, you misread. It looks like he was put in timeout. I think he was taken out of timeout. It's not telling me I can take him out of time. Oh, he's only put in timeout for 60 seconds. I apologize. I apologize to Tommy, son of Allah. You were making people misunderstood. People misunderstood what you were saying. I don't think that you were doing anything bad. He was only timed out for 60 seconds. It's already expired. But my apologies to Tommy. No apologies, however, to Islam is the ultimate truth. He deserved to be timed out. Just a misunderstanding. No worries. No efforts. Anyway, okay, we'll be back with tomorrow for Mary for that stream on how to ensure you have proper thinking is how I'm going to phrase it. Thank you all for tuning in today. As a reminder, there's a recommendation to check out a stream that Hatun did with Adam Seeker on leaked information about sexual abuse in the mosques of Pakistan. I put a link to that in the chat again. Thank you for tuning in today, and we'll close out with a prayer from Pastor Jake.
Pray this ceaselessly. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me.